So I'll just give a quick recap. Thanks, guys, coming out. Some of you are new, so good coming out here. We try and hold this once a month, different topics. So next month we're going to do OpenShift. We've done a lot of OpenShift talks. It's usually a lot of what I'm doing these days. So I take that. Probably glad to that one. But so we have OpenShift on AppDynamics monitoring an application on OpenShift, a JBoss application, which should be kind of interesting. In August, we're going to do sort of we have an internal project that someone's been looking at just as a POC to do what would happen if you ran sort of your fantasy football team using JBoss rules. So he's going to present on that in August. In September, we have another JBoss rules. Eric Shable's coming down to do a workshop on some of the business rules and business process management stuff are there. October is tentatively still open, although I think I just got a program with the possibility for that. And then November, we're going to do JBoss Operations Network and RTI and some of that, another monitoring tool. So we've got a lot of neat different technologies coming out. And if there's something that we don't have in the county you want to see, let me know, and we'll get you on there. So that I'm pretty much going to turn it over to Kenny here, and he'll have the floor for the night. So if you have any questions, it's all Kenny.
Absolutely, thank you. So the title of our session tonight is Building SOA Applications with JBoss Fuse Service Works. And it's a workshop, so you will have links to the materials. So if you don't have a computer now, you'll be able to get those links later and do the workshop. I will go through a presentation, maybe talk for 45 minutes to possibly an hour to set the stage for the workshop. So please, if you have any questions or any comments, feedback, let me know so that we can improve the workshop. This workshop, we did it at Asia Pacific Technical Exchange as well as Red Hat Summit. At Red Hat Summit, we got top performers, so hopefully you'll find value in the workshop. Take a look and send me any feedback or questions that you have. I have this out on speakerdeck.com, speakerdeck.com/kpeople, and I'll pull that link up in a minute if you want to write it down. So this presentation is out there, and you can find all the links that I reference out on SpeakerDeck as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, the abstract for this meeting. Yes?
You had something on here about data virtualization.
So that's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. So I started out with the data virtualization workshop running on Docker because I wanted to try and have a workshop that people could download and we could use with partners and customers and so forth. So there is a data virtualization workshop, and it contains more labs within it. And I can share that link with you as well. It's out on GitHub. But tonight it's just Fuse Service Works. And the data virtualization workshop is based on that financials demo. And the Fuse Service Works workshop is based on a home loan demo, denying or accepting applications. So good question, and I would love feedback on either of them, so please do that. So as I said, the abstract, we're going to discuss Fuse Service Works, and the application that we will build, so that will be built during the workshop, is a home loan application with SwitchYard, and it does include Camel, business processes, and rules. And going through that workshop, there's Lab 1 that is building the SwitchYard application. There's a Lab 2 that is using the design time governance, which is managing the application lifecycle. And then there's a Lab 3 that's capturing service activity through runtime governance. Lab 3 is not integrated with the home loan application because there is more coding, and I have to add that piece. We're gonna. I'm not gonna read that first paragraph because we're gonna hit more on Fuse Service Works in just a minute. Is it? Can you hear it a little bit? Is anybody else hot? Yeah, can we make it a little bit cooler? Is that possible?
Well, I don't know.
I've never done that.
The building company controls it, so
It's not gonna happen.
So it's shut off.
we may not have a way to do that. All right.
It'll be a party later when everybody starts taking the shirt off. All right. So this past weekend, I went to Disney World. Now, one of my favorite things there is the Monsters, Inc. theater, the show. And of course, it has my Wosky or whatever his name is. But anyway, that's why I add that image up there. So the agenda for the workshop, we're going to review the workshop material, about 10 minutes or less. Review Fuse Service Works, about 10 minutes or less. Review the setup. So I have the instructions where you can use the simplified template to get Fuse Service Works running, or you can use the Dockerfile to get Fuse Service Works running. And that way you can start going through the labs. And then the rest of the time is hands-on. So I know some of you don't have laptops, so I can show some of this myself, or you can try the hands-on lab at home. And feel free to send me questions, and please raise your hand. And one of the main reasons I have that in there is because it was a hands-on. I wanted to make sure that I walked around and helped anybody that needed it. So one of the questions I have for everybody here, how many have installed JBoss Enterprise Application Platform? Okay. And so what kind of app server have you guys used before?
I've deployed a Tomcat.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so going through the lab, you shouldn't have any problem. One thing to note, the reason I have instructions for some of the setup and configuration is because at Summit, the environment was already staged. So the reason I have some of these instructions is you set up your environment and then you start going through the lab with the SwitchYard application. So when you, and I'll go over that in a minute, but when you look at the lab guides, they reference /home/lab10, and that just means whatever your home directory is because of that environment already being set up. Expectations for the workshop. So I wanted to set the expectations for what we're going to cover. So this workshop, you'll notice in the guides in just a minute, it's step by step, and it has for your information guides, and it has your to-do list. So some of the stuff is already built for you, and then you're able to go and add some things to see how it's working, and then continue on the workshop. So I wanted to make sure that everybody knew it's not completely start from scratch, but the goal is to show you SwitchYard, Overlord, the designer, and so forth. So, as I said, it's intended to show the capabilities of FSW and the designer. And when I say it's a work in progress, if you find any issues, then please go to the GitHub location, which I'm going to show you, and just enter in an issue, and I'll fix it. Hopefully there won't be any. Lab 1 and 2 was very stable. I don't think you'll find any issues there. Lab 3, I'm trying to update for this specific application. What's in there now are referencing quick starts. It is a hands-on workshop, and it's to be started today, finished at home. If you don't have a laptop, you can finish at home. And like I said, the workshop it's not completely from scratch, and it also is not giving you a demo in 5 minutes just to go on. The workshop was intended for you to do hands-on, get used to it, learn more about Fuse Service Works. And it's intended to showcase a demo at the end of each lab. So again, my email, I'm on IRC, and that's the GitHub location. And like I said, this presentation's out on SpeakerDeck, and I'll show you that in a minute as well. And one thing to note, so I definitely need feedback, as much feedback as possible, but please don't put something on there like it was great and not say why it wasn't great. And don't say it sucks and not say why it sucks. You know, any constructive criticism will definitely help either way so that we can improve it. All right, so how many in here have used ActiveMQ? AMQ. How about Fuse? Camel? Carafe? CXF? Okay. And Fuse Service Works, how about SwitchYard? Overlord? EAP? Okay. So just to kind of highlight what we're talking about, put it in perspective, we have our JBoss AMQ, which is messaging, and that is based on Apache ActiveMQ. And that runs on Carafe. Now what has recently come out, there are instructions to run AMQ on EAP. And if you're interested in that, I can get that information for you. And that is, like it says here, our messaging bus, integrate applications, by notification or exchange of data using multiple protocols in any runtime. Some of the demos that Christina and I have out there, using AMQP, MQTT, different protocols with messaging. One that she just did recently that I like a lot that we may do for DevOps and on a Raspberry Pi is around a biomedical use case and a dashboard, and having some sensor data show up on the dashboard using WebSockets and MQTT Raspberry Pi. Yeah.
Hey, question. So Fuse is basically something I've had questions about several times. What's Fuse and what isn't Fuse compared to Fuse Service Works? So Fuse is literally a subset of Fuse Service Works. Someone recently was saying that it wasn't, that it was something different. I was confused.
So yes, so I think that even on the Red Hat side, I think some solutions architects and others, and even me coming from my background, I had to make sure I got a grasp of why you're looking at an ESB, or what could be considered 2 ESBs, right? Or 3 messaging, multiple messaging from some of the other JBoss messaging. And I think the easiest way to look at it, and the easiest way to describe it, and I think the Red Hat people have it down pretty good now, at least the ones I've talked to. You start off with AMQ, that's our messaging. So if you want to use just messaging, you can use AMQ on Carafe. And if you use instructions we have now, you can run it on EAP as well. Then if you need to go up to a service bus for the mediation, transformation, the integration patterns, right? You use Fuse. And what does Fuse bring you? It brings you Camel, brings you ActiveMQ, the AMQ messaging, CXF, for your web services, and that runs on Carafe. Now, what's taken place recently, I think I can get those instructions for you as well if you're interested. You can run Camel on EAP. Carafe container. Yes, when I say Carafe, and this goes back to the Fuse source acquisition, right? AMQ ran on Carafe. The ESB ran on Carafe. But what we're trying to do is make sure, because people are asking, well, we don't use Carafe, we use EAP. We want to use Carafe and not use EAP. So what we're trying to do is make sure those components can run on both. So that's why I start out with AMQ with the messaging saying, yeah, it's definitely on Carafe, but now you can run it on EAP as well. And then when we go to Fuse, like I said, you have the Camel, CXF, ActiveMQ, and Carafe.
So ActiveMQ is part of Fuse. So that's the part I'm.
Yes. Yeah, and the reason I have the slide like this is if you look up here, we have our arrow going across, right? Well, why do we have that? It's because it's added capabilities, right? If you just want messaging, we don't want everything out of Fuse Service Works. You just want messaging, but you want AMQ. Because we want to get all those subscriptions right. Don't want to use community stuff, just use Red Hat JBoss stuff. But our AMQ, based on ActiveMQ for our messaging, then our service bus, like I said, includes AMQ, and it includes Camel, CXF, on Carafe. And we'll go to Fuse Service Works. This is our service and integration platform, right? Because this includes service governance based on Overlord, runtime governance, design time governance, and our SOA repository. We go to service orchestration, our service development, and then just like here, it includes messaging, Fuse Service Works includes Fuse ESB messaging. So does that answer that question? So this is on EAP. This is on EAP only, Fuse Service for 6.0. I believe what I was seeing may possibly be. I have to go check the version, but they are testing SwitchYard 1.0, SwitchYard over on Carafe, but that's not GA yet. What's GA is Fuse Service Works 6 on EAP, and that is including the Fuse ESB like it has here, which means Camel and the other pieces. Now, like I said, this AMQ, ActiveMQ running on Carafe, you have to follow those instructions that I mentioned for it to run on EAP. So did I clarify that good, or did I muddy waters? Okay. The way I would look at it is it's progression of capabilities, starting out on AMQ and Fuse Service Works.
Yeah, if you get the Fuse Service Works download, it comes with EAP in it, so it's ready to go out of the box.
The definitions are exactly the same.
Huh?
Video transform.
Yeah. Yeah, so when you're talking about routing, Most of the time you're talking about doing the Camel routes.
Orchestration is key. And research.
Yes. So I wanted to add this slide in there so that you could see all the different connectivity options when you look at the top here. It's not more.
Yeah, it doesn't show it. Green doesn't show it.
No, it doesn't. When you look at the top, Red Hat JBoss Data Virtualization, that gives you your data federation and integration piece. I have some nice demos out there on using it with big data, with Hadoop, Blue Hive, and MySQL. I'm glad to share those as well if anybody's interested. But then with Fuse Service Works, as well as Fuse, you have all the other connectivity options as well. So really, with the integration product line, there's probably not much you can do. Camel has over 100 connectors. So let me make sure to show that slide right. So what we talked about, Red Hat JBoss Fuse with integration of messaging, and Fuse Service Works with the lifecycle management, the structured service development, orchestration, and the works process.
If you haven't used Camel, it's definitely worth doing it. It is quite an impressive thing, but it's a different way of thinking. And I think there's quite a bit of traditional software that could be done as Camel routes, but it takes a mindset change to do it.
So as I mentioned before, Fuse Service Works components look at really Camel, SwitchYard, Overlord, and those running on EAP and having the tooling within JBoss Developer Studio and using it with your tooling. JBoss Developer Studio.
I saw AWS.
Amazon?
Yeah.
Because of the connectors to cloud. So if you want a specific use case, I can send you one.
Actually, there's one I'm experimenting with using, and that is Camel connectors to go to AWS Message Queues, in fact, AWS SQS.
So services
Interface to AWS.
And you can go out to camel.apache.org. I don't know the Red Hat one. I need to memorize that one. But out on camel.apache.org, you'll find a link that's connectors, and it'll have all the list of connectors available. Salesforce.com.
just adapters.
Yeah.
It's an interface that opens up and you talking to it, whether it's sitting in the cloud or SaaS.
Right.
And some of this can be done through Fuse or data virtualization. There's one of the presentations we did at Summit was integrations. This is actually the SAP and not Salesforce, but using data virtualization to get data from Salesforce. And there's two connectors, using data virtualization to get the data from SAP. And there's also two connectors, an SAP NetWeaver Gateway and an SAP J-Code connector within Fuse. So there's 3 different ways to get to SAP using 2 different products of JBoss.
But the connect Fuse Service Works to data virtualization always a JBC.
So if you're going to use data virtualization, you have all your data sources that you can connect to in multiple ways.
Gotcha.
You're going to consume it, say consume it through Fuse Service Works. You use JDBC, and I have a demo with the big data that the consumer portion is showing JDBC with Squirrel Client with the data virtualization dashboard. If you use ODBC with Microsoft Excel Power View and use the map, then OData and REST. And so multiple ways there to use data virtualization. I like data virtualization a lot. I think it's real powerful. I don't know if anybody's done anything with that. So the workshop that we have is based on a home loan application. So if you'll notice here, when you go into JBoss Developer Studio and you import Lab 1, it's not going to look like this. And the main reason it's not going to look like this is you have to build some of it. So some of it is built for you, but when you're going through it, you have to complete some of the services. So really a lot of the wiring is not going to be there. Because you're going to have components, you're going to have your references. So if you look over on the left-hand side, and I'm going to pull up the lab guide in just a minute, but when you're going through your lab guide, it's going to show you each component or each piece within JBoss Developer Studio, such as on the left-hand side, the project, such as your services, your references, and your components. And then over on the right-hand side, your palette, and then your canvas in the middle. So the lab guide goes through each piece of that and explains that to you so that you understand it. So the workshop material, there's a guides directory that has a lab intro, a lab 1, a lab 2, and a lab 3. The intro explains the guide setup, the FYI, and the to-do. The lab 1 is SwitchYard, lab 2, DTGov, lab 3, RTGov. And so it's going to walk through creating that SwitchYard application, deploying that SwitchYard application, and then how to obtain metrics off that application. Is everybody with me so far? Okay. Since it's a little warm, I want anybody to fall asleep. And so one of the things that I want to do, and I don't know if anybody in here looks at Eric's stuff, he has on Reveal.js on OpenShift, so you can easily go through the slides and follow the work. And since OpenShift can use BPM, there's some of these demos out on OpenShift, where you can do the cloning of GitHub, create the application in OpenShift yourself. I'll be able to get this over there, or at least into the Docker container. So online, the BXMS, I don't know if that's over there or not, but I have to ask you.
Gotcha.
I know the data virtualization, so when you go out to openshift.com/xpath, it has data virtualization, has Fuse, it has the BPM, I think that's it. But the DV and the Fuse are both alpha cartridges. Okay, so the instructions on here that I have, there's a simplified template, which means you take the Fuse Service Works, put it in a directory, it'll run a script, and then the portion and RTGov portion for you in the background. I made it script. Install script directly, and then you're up and going with Fuse Service Works. But normally in production, you want your design time government separate from your runtime server. But for demo purposes, it puts it all together. And then the second is a Dockerfile that's actually linked from jboss.org downloads for both data virtualization and Fuse Service Works. So what I'll do is build a Docker image for you if you run the Docker build off of that Dockerfile. Then you can connect JBoss Developer Studio to your server, or in your POM, you can change the SRAMP address to that. So I'm not going to run through and give you each step, or tell you each step. You can go back and look at Speaker Deck. I'm going to give you that address in just a minute. But the option 1, if you notice step 1, that's where the simplified Fuse Service Works template is on GitHub. So you can clone that, you can download the product, and then you run a script after you change that install path, and it will set it up for you. Now, and this is showing how to configure, like I said before, we had to configure Fuse Service Works because the environment was already set up at Summit. So this shows you how to just set up the database real quickly. It's just H2. And what I'm going to do is put that in the Docker image so you don't have to do that. But right now, if you do it on bare metal or the Docker image, you have to set up H2 with this directory. And in GitHub, you can just copy the files over instead of creating them. And like I say, you can go in and do that manually, or you can just copy over the files I have out in GitHub. And that's just adding the data source. And then this is setting up JMS. If you remember back on the diagram, and you can pull this up in JBoss Developer Studio, but there were 2 intake services. One was the SOAP intake, and one was the JMS intake, but they both went through the same process. Camel out. So this is how to set up the JMS queue. And then one of the things that we did at Summit, we had all the repos, the Maven repositories on the environment, so we wouldn't have to hit the internet. But that's about 5 gig because it needs the Fuse Service Works repo, it needs EAP repo, and so forth. So out on the GitHub repo, I do have the online settings.xml that you can use, because when you go through the SwitchYard application, you need that. And that's the location of the Dockerfile to build the Docker image. And if you have any feedback on what you would like to see in that Docker image, whether it's layering some demos on top of that, I'd like to know. I am going to change, I'm not going to change, I am going to add a layer where it'll use that base and then add the home loan demo on top of it, so that you can just go run the home loan application, pull it up in JBoss Developer Studio, and show the canvas with what's included in the application. That way, in the future, you don't have to go through the lab. You have a way to run it and a way to look at it. Everybody with me? Good so far? Okay. So I put the steps for Docker setup in here. How many of you use Docker? How many like Docker? So I really like Docker a lot, and I think at some point in the future, you'll be able to create a Docker image and push it out to OpenShift. Docker is really powerful, that you can create that image, run it locally, and then you can link or layer images with your base image. So you can do a lot of different things there.
Not just that you can push out to OpenShift, but you can make that Docker image and push it to potentially multiple things without having to do a lot of work. That's one of the real benefits, is that view it as another container, I guess, since you can't have enough containers.
And the way that I want to use it, so having 4 products before, it's hard to get around to some of this new stuff, but what I would like to do is the use cases the solutions architects have with customers, create more demos with the Docker images and hopefully put that on a Red Hat Docker repository that people can go and get that can easily run a demo if the use case applies to them.
No, one suggestion I've had on the quick starts is that and demos like those or setups like those are that they're really easy quick ways to get going on it, but they don't typically tell you how to get to the quick start. Meaning, if you started with nothing and you wanted to create what was in the quick start, it can be difficult to figure out what type of project, how is this done, just and some of the most basic things. So it becomes tempting to take the quick start and then try and copy it and use it, and then you've got to remove stuff out of it, and the structure is not quite what you want, and so on. So one suggestion I've always had for people making demos is that it's really good to have working code and then at least some instructions to say how to create that working code, because that's the real learning experience, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the solution architects do a good job at the demos because they give a lot of them. I think sometimes the quick starts are there that you can base things on, copy and use, but more documentation would help. I think on the Red Hat documentation site, they're adding more information on the quick starts in there. So hopefully that will get better, and it's still good, like you said, there still some issues there. Just take one of them and run with it. But the way that I see using the Docker containers is doing the evangelism and showing people how to use the product and building the articles. I think that'll really help a lot, especially if it can go out to OpenShift or wherever. So we'll see how that goes. So a couple of things to note on here. On the Docker page, they show how to install Docker on multiple platforms. The next thing is when I'm running it in my Fedora VM, I had to make a change, some permissions change there, and I haven't figured out yet why that's a bug or what. So that's why I have that there. And then before, like I mentioned, I was trying to have the tar image. So I could just give that tar image to somebody and they could load it, and there they have Fuse Service Works and demo. But what's taking place right now is Red Hat's trying to have product management and a Red Hat Docker repository and make sure engineering can maintain Docker images versus Docker files. So I can't put a tar image out there or upload my stuff to the Docker repository at this time, the public one. But hopefully soon you'll see some of that where I just want to run this home loan and go to the repository, pull it down, and use it. You'll notice there's the clone of the Git repo for the Dockerfile, and then it shows you how to build and connect to it. And when you build that image and the container's running, you need a way to connect to it with that SRAMP or browser or JBoss. So there I show how to grab the IP for it so that you can connect to it. So running through with Docker and playing around with it, I just made a note of a couple of things that you could do if you wanted to clear your containers and images when you were trying to rebuild them, as well as saving your image and giving it to somebody else to load.
I didn't realize that it worked off of tarballs.
If you want to save it and load it, you can do that.
I didn't know that.
It's available. Yeah. And that's what I had done to share with people doing the workshops. I created a tar image. But like I said before, that puts in the product, and we need people to go to jboss.org to download, to sign on and download the product to accept the agreement. So just a couple of notes. With using the Docker, you need to change the SRAMP repo in Maven, and also using JBDS, you have to point it to the Docker container.
By the way, if y'all aren't familiar with some of the terms he's using, SRAMP, DTGov, or RTGov, and so on, those are all things that are associated with a variety of things in terms of governance and controls and so on. So in the Fuse Service Works, the whole shebang is in there. So there's quite a bit of Fuse documentation, which can be a little daunting when you look at it, but it is worth browsing it just for familiarity.
Yeah, just to go back and make sure that these terms aren't real confusing. So when we look at Overlord, that's our runtime governance, our design time governance, and our repository. So
replacement for governor?
Is it a replacement for governor? Not that I know of.
It's not governor in the same sense.
Right. I don't do enough with governor. But one thing I want to note here, if you'll look at the bottom, so design time governance manages that life cycle so that you can, for instance, the default workflow that comes with design time governance is dev, QA, staging, production. So design time governance helps you move your application through those environments to allow you to pass it or fail it through each environment, as well as have your application components within your SOA repository. And that's what SRAMP is. And then with runtime governance, you can capture service activity. And right now, a lot of that is adding some code. Hopefully in the future, there'll be less code that you have to add to your application. And you can see that within the quick start. All right, so one of the things that I noticed when I was going through with data virtualization to connect remotely to the data virtualization server, and this appeared to be the same way with Fuse Service Works. So I'm going to go back and test it again, but this is the way I ran it before. When you're going in to add a new server within JBoss Developer Studio, say connect to my EAP, which contains Fuse Service Works for DataVirt, the very first screen, it was looking for a local configuration. So I had to point it to a local configuration like a standalone.xml. And then it'll let me get to the second screen to actually connect to the remote server.
By the way, one thing I discovered was that I had an EAP running that didn't have Fuse Service Works on top of it. I had both. And JBDS will find it and deploy to it, but then it'll get it confused, and it won't be obvious that that's the one that doesn't have FSW.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to go over one quick thing, and then I want to kind of open the floor up and ask questions, or see what questions I can answer. So when I go to, so this is out on GitHub. We'll pull up Speaker Deck in just a minute. But when I go to guides, let's take a quick look at the intro PDF. So I want to run through this guide and then pull up Speaker Deck and then just kind of open the floor up to talk more. Because one of the things I like about this workshop is that it is easy to run through and use. And so this is 3 labs in one. There's one guide per lab. And so we're going to go through a quick introduction of kind of the layout and then you can go through the lab later on, and we'll have some quick Q&A. But in the lab guide, you'll see to-do list, which defines the tasks that you perform. So like I say, you start out with a base, pull in the SwitchYard application, finish it through the to-do list and the FYI, and then do your design time governance to deploy it to the server, and then runtime governance to look at your metrics. And we have our FYI, which are notes that describe things. So this is an example of looking at a credit list. There depends on what you want to collect. So I'll go over in just a second and show you the 4 gadgets that allows you to collect metrics and what it's collecting. And so here with our credit service fee, it's giving an example within FYI that describes what's going on, and then a to-do list to tell you what to do in the lab. So then with Lab 1, you're going to get familiar with the development environment, application design and implementation, the hands-on experience with SwitchYard principles, and that's around SwitchYard. So that's building your application. And then with Lab 2, our design time governance, gain the experience with service governance workflows in Fuse Service Works, familiarizing yourself with design time governance and SRAMP, and managing the service, like I said, through dev, QA, stage, and production, and then learning the service lifecycle management principles. And then with Lab 3, going through the runtime governance, where you gain experience of those capabilities with RTGov, becoming familiar with the service activity monitoring and reporting, and familiarity with the policy enforcement. And so then there are a couple of gotchas that are listed in here. I think this one, when you first pull it up, there's errors and warnings, and that's because you're not finished with the lab yet. It doesn't go away. The second gotcha, when you're pulling in the interfaces that you're going to use, it may take a minute for them to pull up for that search, but you can always enter text and it'll come up. These are just a couple of gotchas when you're going through there. And then Eclipse, there's a schema validation errors that come up, but that's not going to be fixed right now, but you can go and remove the honor all XML schema locations. You disable that and those will go away. And then you'll see an error on SMTP, and that's because it's not set up. All right, so then it indicates to start off with Lab 1. So let me show you a couple of things, and I'm going to hit the question you had on the RTGov, because I want to show the 4 examples that I like using. But let's go. I'm going to show you a couple of things, and then we'll do questions. Okay. So out on Speaker Deck, I know there were a lot of links. So out on speakerdeck.com/kpeoples. This should be today's. You can find some of the things that I put out there. Views on OpenShift, data virtualization, some other items. But all the links that I was discussing, you can go through here and find those. And then the other thing, I mentioned the data virtualization workshop. And it doesn't want to come up. Out under data virtualization by example, there is the DV workshop, and it is using a Dockerfile as well. And there is a actually a virtual machine for VirtualBox that you can use for that one. No, that's not coming up. Okay. That's interesting. Okay. Let's see. So some of what I was trying to do is put the blogs out. I'm going through these, but I do want to move it over into OpenShift as much as I can and using the presentation reveal.js out there. But the reason I'm pulling this up is because I want to show you a good example of using RTW. Is everybody still awake? No. Okay. Are we doing good? Any feedback? What is this one? All right, so the reason I wanted to show you this one, this is a good example of using the runtime governance quick starts at the command line. And I'm trying to put out there a blog on doing this with the 4 gadgets that are in the runtime governance user interface. So when you install Fuse Service Works, you have the design time governance, UI, RT governance, UI, and the SRAMP UI. But this is just command line. But to give you an example, I believe this first one is I believe that's just making sure that it's going through properly. So one example is the policy enforcement, such as Fred cannot perform more than 1 request every 2 seconds. So that's enforcing a certain policy and checking every time. And then the next one is the policy enforcement to make the customer suspended after 3 attempts go over a certain threshold for a certain balance. And then it should be going on to the SOA monitoring, the service level agreement monitoring for the situations active collection. And you can look at that through REST or JMX. Then the in this case, I believe it was. I have to go and pull up, but it was exceeded maximum response time of 400 milliseconds. So if I remember this specific example, it had service level agreements of certain levels that it could report back.
So there is some performance monitoring.
It's just, yeah, it's beyond monitoring. It's actually enforcement.
Security.
And so, and then you can also do the reporting of your service level agreements. And this is showing an example of that with a, you build the report, and then you can hit the report with certain parameters. So it just gives you kind of a highlight. There's 4 quick starts with R2Go. Now that I kind of blew through that, so what kind of questions do you guys have? And I would love for you to be able to go and do the workshop and give me input, but I want to make sure that this session, you know, helps you get some answers that you may have had to some questions.
I have a couple of fundamental SwitchYard questions just from using it.
Okay.
One is going through the documentation, particularly SwitchYard documentation. There are places where when you're putting together a composite app and components, you can make a choice of Java, WSDL, or ESB. There actually isn't anything to say why you would pick Java over ESB or ESB as an interface over Java.
And I've had that discussion with somebody before I heard that discussion. Because it's just going to depend what your need is.
Yep.
It's going to depend on your use case. It kind of goes back to when we were talking about the 3 different products. You're going to choose one of those products depending on your use case. Yep. So when you get into building a SwitchYard application and you get into the design there, it's going to depend on your use case. Just like Camel, when you're building your routes, so there are 100 connectors you can use. But you have a specific use case for your Camel routes and what you're needing to integrate with. So it's going to depend on your use case.
So if you were building something that wasn't integrating, then you could use ESB, for example. There'd be no reason not to use ESB, right? That for some reason I keep tending to ESB, but I'm not sure that I should
be using Fuse versus Fuse Service Works.
No, in Fuse Service Works, using the ESB as an interface choice in a composite app between components.
Well, so I guess it's going to depend whether you're going to have your components locally,
right,
or whether you're calling out to the components. It's just going to depend on the use case.
Would that matter in a clustered environment?
So I haven't built a clustered environment myself, but the clustering should be handled at the EAP level.
Yeah, how did it review SwitchYard? It's been an awesome thing.
So
Not the slide, but SwitchYard.
So let me ask that back to you. So what have you done with SwitchYard in the past, or what have you learned about SwitchYard? Let's see. So let's do this. Let's start here, because I have a lot of presentations, but let's start here. So the idea of building a SwitchYard application is building services and components so that they're loosely coupled.
You have a diagram of that, so SwitchYard on that.
This is SwitchYard.
I want to see that.
Sure.
There we go, right there. Put it back one more. There we go.
All right, so that's so if you go through the lab, and so just so everybody knows, I could dive down into each of these technologies, but this session I geared toward a workshop and showing where the workshop was versus going deep down into technology. So just set that expectation. But in the lab itself, that lab 1 with SwitchYard, it goes through each of the pieces within building a SwitchYard application. So
Just give me a 2-minute.
okay, so within SwitchYard, and I'll rather go back to this one because I think this is better. So when you're trying to build your SwitchYard application and using the SwitchYard components, if you look over on the right-hand side, and I know you were looking at, this other diagram as being easier to show, but the policy, admin, transformation, gateways, implementations, and the Camel components, those pieces of SwitchYard are right over here on your right-hand side. So you start out with a blank canvas, right? And you can add your components, your services, and your references. And the difference between there, components going to be within your application. Services are going to be exposed to the outside, such as the intake SOA, intake JMS, or our status REST service. Then you're going to have your components inside, which can be BIPL, BPMN rules, and within this application, the home loan, it's using your BPMN, your business process for the pre-qualification, and using rules within the loan evaluation and the beam that's within credit to determine whether they're qualified or not. And by going to the external reference of customer lookup. So I agree. When you look at the Fuse ESB and talk about Camel, CXF, and ActiveMQ, that does a lot too, and your Camel routes have all those connectors. But when you come into SwitchYard, you want to build those services and components and loosely couple them. And this gives you an excellent way to build those and wire those together. Now, the only thing that I have seen so far that I've already talked about requesting, and I believe other people have, and they're looking at it, you have one SwitchYard application canvas there. But you can't have multiple of those. You can call out an external reference to another SwitchYard application, but you can't have multiple ones within this one application. But so does that kind of give you an overview? And I think this is a good diagram here that describes. We have our transformations, we have our gateways, we have our implementations.
Yeah, this actually.
But I think this gives you a better overview because you have multiple application implementations that you can use and wire them together.
So the one thing too with the SwitchYard, so what you cannot do with like the previous JBoss ESB product, and you really can't do with any of them.
And when you say previous ESB, do you mean SOA P5?
No, I mean JBoss ESB, the upstream.
The JBoss. Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that should have been what was in SOA P5.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
It was in SOA P5, and then SwitchYard replaced that. But you could unit test any of your services.
Good point.
And SwitchYard actually started to enable that because now you can do mock objects and stub out stuff.
And so that's a very good point. When you're going through Lab 1 with SwitchYard, every piece that you do, I think there's 7 steps within there. Each step that you go through, it says were you successful or not. And what determines a success is the test, the unit test that's built.
So it's built right into.
Yeah, so let's jump over to here real quick and let me show you this.
And so it sort of does kind of what I'm blanking on this one. But the IOC, the version of control that you got with beans and spring and all that stuff, that's kind of SwitchYard started to introduce that for services. So you can actually swap out endpoints just specifically for test and have that same code and swap those out for production. Just pure IOC for the annotations and everything.
Right, so that's one of the nice things about this lab and why I didn't prepare just a presentation, and so I was trying to go down this workshop path, is within this workshop, it's going through the basic things about SwitchYard, and then it goes through these 7 steps to finish the home loan application. That's the component service, the component reference, Camel routing, reference binding, transformations, the service binding, and then that RESTful service. And after each of those 7 steps, you have a unit test that you run, and then you can move on to the next step. And it's not requiring you to deploy it to the Fuse Service Works server and test it there. You can test it right out of your development environment. And so, and that's what this.
That was the missing piece for me.
The unit test or just SwitchYard in general?
SwitchYard in general.
Okay. Yeah. So we were talking about unit testing services. Within this Lab 1 guide, you'll notice Step 1 test through Step 7 test on the right-hand side. It's having you do each of those tests to say whether you're successful or not. And then also within here. Also within the lab guide, it's going through what the canvas is, the button bar and the palette, which I described earlier, but it also is taking you through the wiring. And if you'll notice, the canvas, there's some wiring missing, and that's because you walk through those with the lab to complete it. But this is showing you what the wiring is for all three parts, the component service, the component reference, and so forth.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with this, this really is an interesting way of doing this in terms of a drag and drop, where you know that you want to make some software, and you know that software is going to have some kind of inputs, and it's going to have some kind of outputs, and it's going to have to do these processing or transformations inside. This is very much the drag and drop onto the canvas situation, which then begins to create the template, or creates the template for all that code, and then you can fill it in where you want. But you can, in advance, say it's going to have this particular type of interface. That interface is going to have this kind of data going through it. But it's also something that you have to iterate a few times to get the hang of doing it. So it isn't you're going to be a pro at it after one use by any means.
You can print that out, but can you export that to some kind of documentation?
Yep. Well, you can export the view that you're seeing right here to an image.
Right.
And JavaDoc obviously would do other things as well, but no, not any sort of other formal documentation.
So you do this first, and that creates like stops, and then you implement those, or you implement components first and then wire them?
In a sense, you start with the middle. I mean, you say you're going to have something that goes, you're going to have a bead or a camel route, in this case, in the middle, so you drag a camel route onto it. And then you're going to say, well, I know that camera route's going to have a file polar in the front. So I need to have an interface that's going to be a file polar, which creates this, and then this becomes your input, in effect. Then you come back over here and you pick one of the bindings that says file, drag it on top of this, and then it lets you fill in file names, directories, etc. And then that becomes your input source. This becomes the route. And then you know that this is going to be going somewhere out. You begin to say, okay, I need one output that's going to go to a JMS queue, for example, and then drag JMS on top of that. So you don't have to know the specifics of necessarily how to do it, but it at least puts the structure in.
So the things on the left-hand side in your
those are the inputs, yeah.
Oh, you mean so
components and
the service on the left-hand side?
No, I'm talking
the
about
intake. So
in your like Explorer.
Oh, okay.
JBoss.
That's what I thought you were referring to. Let me bring that back over.
Yeah, that's the Eclipse project.
Yeah, so this is our project in JBDS. And right, you have your services, references, and components. So that's what's included in the SwitchYard.
So those are the things you have developed, right?
Yeah.
No.
And see how the wiring is here, and see the intake JMS right there. When we come back over here, you'll notice that those are missing. Because as you're going through the lab, you're building upon those.
So when you do this, this will generate these classes, and then you fill those up with code. Is that
Yeah, and so you'll notice when you're going through this, it'll say, we'll go pick out this interface, and you go and do that selection. Yeah. I think what they've done with SwitchYard is really powerful, and what it includes within the implementations. Like you said, what you can drag and drop and wire together.
So you get a visual view you have a mental view of what your code's going to do. You begin to drag the pieces to make it visual, and then that creates the code structure. I also didn't realize until recently that you could use an architect to create the project from scratch via the UI or via JBoss.
And do a new project and SwitchYard.
Because what I was having to do, I was doing it initially incorrectly, and it wasn't creating the correct Java view. I didn't have source main Java, source test Java, or whatever it is. Those things, those weren't being done. I was having to do it manually, or I was having to go to Maven do it with a Maven architect and then import it. And I stumbled in the Eclipse manual or something somewhere saying you could actually do the new project as a Maven architect or something like that, and then do the same architect selection right from the UI, right from JBoss.
Were you saying before this is, are you building the abstracts and you create the implementations?
That creates the implementation, and you just begin to fill it in. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I guess when you drag those components, right, templates, that generates a stub,
Yes.
and that's the one you fill out.
Right.
On the
And it also couples them together, meaning that when you tell it that you're going to have an input, then and here's the input, and then it's going to be of this type, it's actually creating the code for you, in fact.
Yeah.
If you're able to be that specific. Now, I did find that it is possible to get the SwitchYard out of sync with the files, meaning you can go into the SwitchYard, into the composer or the GUI, delete something, and the code's still sitting in the structure. Still sitting. So, for example, you can go in and delete a component off of the graphic, but the source is still sitting on the disk. Which means if you go back to create it again, it won't let you because it says the name's already there. So you can get the two out of sync with each other.
I don't know if that was intentional or not.
I suspect that it probably is. It's just one of those
Well,
things.
I don't think they've changed this yet, but if you notice, you can't go in and edit the XML, the SwitchYard XML.
Now I had to do that manually today.
You have to go out into an editor to do it. You can't do it
Because I was getting an error in SwitchYard saying that it was missing a promoted entry under an SCA reference. And yet I didn't see it in the graphic, I saw it on the source side. It would flag the line. I had to open the file under an editor and add promote equals or whatever it was, and that fixed the issue. So occasionally I think that you may have to go and do manual fix up, and I still don't know what it was that got it.
So I don't know the status of that. They talked about whether to open that up. So when you're in JBoss Developer Studio, you see the view there, and you can view the source, but it won't let you edit the source of the XML, the SwitchYard XML. You can open it up external and change it, but I don't know what they're decided to do on that.
Why don't we just, once you manually edit and then you change it to SwitchYard delete, or you manually edit, you got it.
Yeah.
That's very frustrating.
But that was pretty much what I had to try and go over. I was hoping people would be able to try the lab and give us some input there. So we can keep talking for a little while. Go over some more. Eat some more pizza. Or
Well, it takes a while to download JBoss, etc. So if you want to do it, you should go ahead and start, because it will take, particularly over the wireless.
Okay. And I guess if you wanted me to, I could give you a USB stick with two things on it.
Without getting into too much theory, I'd still use Fuse when you have an enterprise service bus need for your game.
I would say, let's look back at that graphic, I would say your integration. You want to use enterprise.
Integration patterns. Okay. To get one message to one or more recipient, translate the message, transform it. But if you want to use Fuse Service Works, it gives you an orchestration where you want to do something in between getting that message from A to B.
If you're only going as far as Camel, you can stop at Fuse.
It's just pretty small, and so like you'll see this in a lot of retail for Fuse, because they're just deploying pretty much site, right? Not, but the Fuse Service Works tends to, because of its governance, right, tends to be a lot more centralized.
Yeah, I would look at it, and I think that's a good example. Your Fuse could be satellite sites, right? But your Fuse Service Works is going to be like in your data center, something that's going to handle a lot of the services and components.
Okay.
But your
It's your hub of where your
repository?
Yeah, and with healthcare, it would be a good example. I would think in healthcare, when you have ancillary departments, say you have a lab, radiology, pharmacy, right? You could use Fuse there because you could connect to different instruments or whatever within your ancillary department, but you're going to send a lot of that data back to your Fuse Service Works and your data center.
And the other thing that's going to drive that architecture is the pricing difference between those two, right? So how much you pay for the Fuse is obviously the one on the right is more expensive, so the more deployments you do with those.
But it's still really cheap.
Well, it's still cheap by markets, but if I have 100 ESPs I'm going to deploy across 100 sites, you might start going, maybe I can do a little more.
Yeah, you probably don't need to do business processing at all of the sites.
Right.
The business processing is going to probably tend to be more centralized with the data processing, for lack of a better term, to be more the distributed sites.
So if I didn't have to do governance, could I do everything within Fuse that I could do in Fuse Service Works? Aside from the graphics, SwitchYard, everything.
Well, if you want to do orchestration and you want to do business processes and Camel all together within SwitchYard, then you would need Fuse Service Works.
Gotcha. And
If you're going to use Camel routes and integration, then you could go with Fuse.
Okay.
So there is a lot more stuff.
Like I say, that's why I say it's really hard when people ask which one of those should I use, because the next question should be, well, what's your use case?
Right. Right.
What is your architecture currently, and what are you adding to it?
And what's your goal?
Because then we could whiteboard and say where you need Fuse, where you need Fuse Service Works, or even where you need AMQ, because AMQ, you'd use that for Internet of Things, right? I have sensors, I'm just going to send messages. So you want AMQ there, right? And you could send those straight to Fuse or Fuse Service Works. It just, to me, it's hard to say. Now, other people may be able to give you a more specific answer, but for me, I'd rather see a specific use case and apply those to an architecture.
So if you get SwitchYard, you're going to be using Service Works.
Yes.
I suppose this service governance and service.
So you really have a
Is it
real
VMS or-
No, that's VRMS is a whole different.
No, I know it's different product, but it's based on the same.
Oh. No, not
So
really.
This is what my
So the VRMS product, the VPMS product, uses the same sort of repository that the governor or the Overlord does. That same sort of approach, and so that's where the overlap might be. That's about it.
Now, there's rules can be used in there.
Yeah,
and
was my confusion.
Business
Then-
processes can be
Yeah,
used in
since
there.
it's both part of VRMS.
The easiest way, I think, can be described with Fuse Service Works, with your business processes. You're really going to have that more limited. Your human processing business processes that you want to do, and you probably would use the BXMS product, right, your BPMS, and not Fuse Service Works, because the human business processes, I'd have to go look. I think that's where they're saying that's supported in BPMS. If you're doing extensive human processes, that's what you should be using. You're going to use business processes within Fuse Service Works. You should probably stick to those that are more automated business processes that don't require human intervention.
Good distinction.
Does that kind of answer that question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question about, and so I guess you use this kind of architecture to integrate different systems, right? Maybe different systems in different departments. So you would deploy an instance of Fuse ESV or Fuse Service Works in each of those entities or systems, or how does that work?
So again, I think that's going to depend on the use case, and I hate saying that, but so I don't know if I have
Let me
a
ask the
slide
question more.
So let's take a hospital, or do you have a specific use case?
No, I'm just in general.
Let's take a hospital then. A hospital has, because I did a lot of healthcare before I started working for it. I worked on HL7 integration interfaces. I worked on ancillary department systems and patient system financial systems. So if you look at it as a hospital has many different departments, they have many different systems, they still have an enterprise, right? In my mind, when I'm thinking about this architecture, to apply each of those products, I would have clustered Fuse Service Works for high availability in the data center. I would make sure that I have my orchestration, my governance, that development SwitchYard, SwitchYard applications. And I could have the Camel routes as needed, the rules, the business processes. But if I go to, and that's, say, in the data center, the main computer room for the hospital, right? Because when you look at it, all these ancillary departments, they have to send the patient data, whether it's lab results, radiology results, patient demographics, patient financials, all the different instruments that they interface with, even the external systems that they interface with outside the hospital. These are going to more go into a hub, such as the data center, which would be Fuse Service Works with however many it needs. I wouldn't say 1, 2, 3, 4 unless I knew the volume and what they were doing. But each of the ancillary departments, their laboratory, you may not need all of Fuse Service Works in the laboratory, or you may. It just depends on what you already have there and what new applications you're building. If you're doing just the Camel routes, just the connections to some other systems or instruments, then you can just use Fuse there. Right? If you're building a more complex system within that one department, then you may need Fuse Service Works, but you may not. But then also within that ancillary department, you may have kind of the Internet of Things, where it's, say, biomedical, say a laboratory system that's going to run the blood work. They may be able to send messages. So you may be able to do something with AMQ there. And does that kind of answer? Because when you ask, like, how many of those?
I guess my question really is that what is the minimum thing that you need to talk to this from like a remote location to talk to Fuse Service Works?
A remote location.
So I have JBoss running.
You can run an application, you can run a REST service and expose it here. That's how the way you talk to it.
And so I think, yeah, that's a good point. So when you look here, let's take this one application I'm running, Fuse Service Works. So here I have the intake service, intake JMS service. You send a loan application to both of those. And then this Camel route knows what to do with it at that point. So let's take the healthcare example where, let's just take a blood pressure intake service. Well, let's say you have some old ones that can use JMS. You can have an intake JMS system service, and then say some new ones that are coming out, they can use SOA or REST. So that would be the same thing here. Or let's say that Fuse Service Works, you're trying to send something to an insulin pump for some reason, doing something.
I don't think you'd be doing mission critical applications on this.
Yeah, you would.
I would think.
Depends on what your healthcare plan is.
Yeah.
Cheap or expensive.
So let's go off the healthcare thing. Let's say,
Let's
go back to home loan.
There we go.
Let's go back to home loan. So I've received my application. In this case, it's just trying to give you whether you've been accepted or declined, right? So I'm taking multiple applications. I'm going through this process, and whether I've been accepted or denied. Well, let's say we wanted to add more to this, right? Let's say we want somebody to be able to send FTP, the application here, through FTP. I can just quickly add that. I don't have to change any of this internal stuff. I just add an incoming service. Well, let's say also I'm doing the customer lookup here. But let's say I want to add an external reference here to some other system that we have that is maybe doing some analytics on these applications that are coming in. Well, I could add some kind of external reference to whatever that's exposed in that system, whether it's a REST service or SOAP service. I can just add another one here and wire it.
The power of this is integration of things that you don't know that you're going to integrate to in a week.
That's good.
So you add on to this without changing all the clients or changing all the endpoints. Change the integration piece.
Yeah. I think it's powerful, but I think it's also hard without the specific use case or architecture for what you're integrating with. It's hard to say which of these pieces you're going to use plus the products.
Does Red Hat have any use cases where every product within the middleware suite is used?
Good question. I'm not going to answer that. So when you go out to the Red Hat site, go under each product, they do have like use cases that they talked about for that product. As far as an overarching one,
Even if
not, I don't think there's one I know of yet, but they do have a reference architecture team that's building reference architectures, and I think that's on the roadmap to try and do.
Yeah.
And even the evangelists like me and Eric, Christina, not too long ago we talked about what use case or story, and Thomas, should we use to build these demos. So if you wanted to tie in JDG, Fuse, AMQ, Fuse Service Works, BRMS, BPM, and you just wanted to pick and choose which product on the same storyline, you'd be able to do that, but we don't have all that.
In a 3-day workshop.
So about a year ago, he did the talk, but I had to come out and talk with him. I think it was 2 years ago. About the JBoss Fuse project that was worked on, and this guy's since left and gone to not one of the guys companies. But that one was initially with Red Hat. We were doing it on CMS Gov, and so they basically had data grid, data virtualization, DAP, and then starting to look at the early stages of SwitchYard. This was Fuse Service Works. It was actually out, so it had to be 2 years ago. But looking at those use cases, how to wire all that together.
Do you remember his name?
No.
Okay, and the reason I ask is because there's a reference architecture team that has been, they mainly put out platform use cases, Red Hat Linux and storage and some of the other stuff, but they've hired some middleware people and they were trying to do more of the middleware.
It was Justin Hayes. He's since gone.
He's a consultant.
Yeah, he's left Red Hat since then, but he was on. Yeah.
Maybe he has.
Yeah, but he
The name's familiar, and I knew him from consulting.
Yeah, exactly. And they were doing this more as a POC to say this is how you could put all these technologies together to solve the problem they had.
I bet that's, was that around DoD?
No, that was CMS. It was healthcare.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't healthcare.
Let's not bring that up. Yeah.
You put it back like the guy who was yet.
There's a DoD app that they did build, but that was with SOA and Portal and BPM, I think. That was some of the older products, and that was showing things on the map. They called it Call for Fire. I think they were going to try and, we had looked at trying to upgrade that to some of the products, but that would be a lot more involved than some of the other stuff we talked about.
This is good. I'm just going to jump in there and get your hands dirty.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I think on the workshop perspective, there's a fair amount. If somebody went in cold with nothing on their machine, there's a fair amount to download and install on it. I think that's something to consider as to whether you had either a flash drive or something that was ready to go, or else literally everything in one tarball or something. They could just get one file and get it in there. So I think you might find that either people that might come into the workshop, either they're ready to go and probably familiar enough to get started pretty quickly, or else they're going to really have a lot to do just to get going.
So what would be the vote? Would everybody like a Docker image or images, a virtual machine, or running a Docker build file?
Yes.
So the problem with the Docker, right. So the problem with the Docker, right, is the only way to do Docker on the guys around here boot to Docker or something like that.
Yeah.
So you have to fire up the VMs. And the Windows guy, that's another challenge.
Oh, right. Yeah. Good point.
Which is all boot to Docker, whatever the solution, like simple like solution wants to be. Having correct like instances up in the cloud, either OpenStack or whatever, ready to go, so that ready to go with that. OBAs are ready to put whatever you got, VirtualBox, whatever, plug it away.
So I guess what it sounds like you're saying the easiest thing for a majority of the people would be a virtual image that when you booted it up, the first thing it said was run this script, which will pull the product and install it for you, and then you're ready to go.
Yeah, so you're working on the challenge we have to acknowledge that in terms of service with the product, right?
Yeah.
So you might be able to find a way to compromise and say, well, if I accept this OBA,
That's a good one.
The perfect world is to have a remote desktop, to have it ready to go somewhere where you just instantiate it. Everything's in place, and now run this. I mean, literally run JBS, run FSW.
One of the problems that I have right now, I think that would help in this case. Like I described what Eric's doing, clone a Git repo and then build your application on OpenShift.
Yep.
Well, right now I can't do that. Fuse Service Works doesn't have a cartridge.
I thought there was a Fuse Service Works.
There's a SwitchYard. There's a Fuse.
But
even
that's
Fuse
it's
is
Fuse.
out.
You're right. That's what I've
There is
seen.
a SwitchYard cartridge out there,
Yeah.
but that's old.
Yeah, and that's 0.8, I think. And Fuse Service Works has 1.0. So there's a challenge there temporarily.
Well, I was experimenting today, it's coincidentally today, with EC2, and firing up an EC2 and doing a remote desktop back to here and having the EC2 image have JBS and FSW on it. So that would be a quicker way to do it, but I was having problems with the remote desktop and couldn't figure out why. But that's the perfect world where, because in the workshop, either somebody's going to be ready to go and
I agree with
they
you.
may already know it as a result, or they're not, and they want to see it, and they got to go through a lot of setup.
That's why Summit works so well, right? Because the
Everybody
environment
there,
was
right?
completely ready. You went and you set it at a workstation, and then you grabbed the guides and went through 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
But I want to figure out the best way, but I have to balance it with what I'm supposed to do with the product.
Right. Yeah, oh yeah, no, I understand the challenge, definitely. I think Doug's been IMing there. Let's see if he's got testing.
What about deploying this in a high availability environment? Does that have something you have to build to load balance between two instances of Fuse Service Works?
It's more of instances of EAP.
EAP. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And it'll handle all
And that's
the
the same with what I was doing with data virtualization. Is the same. It should be at the EAP layer.
Isn't your runtime governance single point of failure? Isn't that one repository single point?
There's multiple.
There's SRAM. Right?
SRAM.
SRAM repo.
Right, but so there's a file-based aspect to that one, right? So that puts you have to figure out an HA solution for a file, the repository solution for it. There's a database component as well, right, for SRAM.
She's in mode shape.
Yeah, so so there's a HA thing built in.
Yeah, I don't think it's a single point of failure in the sense that you can't have some redundancy. somewhere, but it still comes down to EAP is where the clustering aspect of the HA aspect is coming from, rather than Fuse Service where it's just sitting on top of it, and the stuff that it's using is databases or whatever that.
Wherever you deploy.
Yeah, I'd like to look and see what they are doing with the reference architecture stuff, because I know they were looking at high availability, providing some guidance, because what they'll do is a guide that they release. And I thought they had talked about high availability, but I don't know what product they were trying to focus on. And I need to go through and test that myself. Honestly, I haven't. So.
And do you know any like commercial well-known applications running on this JBoss Fuse or any known business?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I always have to be careful what you say about what customer is using your product. So generally what we describe is a use case for per industry. It would be healthcare, financial, or whatever.
Yeah, this is definitely not new, immature stuff by any means. It's evolving, obviously, but
I will say this: there probably are more at this point of Fuse and AMQ, right, than Fuse Service Works, because it was just GA. But there's still the early adopters of Fuse Service Works that are out there, and I would think the biggest challenge with Fuse Service Works at this point, and we're trying to address that, is the migrations from SOA P5 to Fuse Service Works 6.
Or any other existing architecture.
Yes, because if you have SOA P5, your stuff is not in a SwitchYard application.
The publicly referenceable Red Hat use cases, you can Google that and Red Hat case studies. They always put them out there, which usually a good number. But you'll find a couple of anecdotal ones around too.
It should be out on redhat.com, and then the products, and then there should be some out there.
So you have early adopters.
So usually with the products, right, they're early adopters. They're going through and testing it and making sure things are okay by the time it gets
That's a
GA.
step in the right direction, absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ken, great job.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. One thing I want to do is put the speaker deck link. So should I
If you just Google Ken Peebles, look him up.
Google what?
Google Ken Peebles,
Kenneth Peoples? Probably.
just K Peebles, and it's unique
I
enough.
posted the,
Oh, did it?
I posted the link in the comments too.
Oh, did you? The speaker